we're talking specifically about, I think, substance dualism here, correct?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so good question. So, referring back to John Cooper in his book, he refers to sort of all sorts of different types of dualism. And so there's often like a perception, and often in many times in biblical as well as theological scholarship, these terms are not often defined and haven't been for much of its history. It's just kind of presumed. And dualism has taken on kind of a negative connotation, a negative connotation of implying something about the body that it's like a bad thing, it's denigrated and things of that sort. Of course, in theological scholarship, there's been a reaction to this kind of view that the body's bad, and there's been a sort of a kind of, at least a superficial, which is, it's true, superficially, like the body's good. It's a good thing, and we should enjoy being embodied and the like. So there's been kind of that impulse. And that's a reaction to the perceptions about dualism. There are different types. So cosmological dualism, you might say there's this view that there are two different ultimate entities, good and bad, or good and evil, and the like. So, and they run the world and like. And so there's that kind of dualism. Then there's the kind of dualism that you might take to entail some kind of what's called, Gnosticism. I mean, Gnosticism is kind of the boogeyman that gets thrown around a lot. Anytime you want to declare somebody's position as
that's very Gnostic. That's very
problematic.
Gnostic.
It's Gnostic, right? So dualism is Gnostic, right? And so that's a common, very, very common charge, and still a common perception or assumption, I think, even amongst some biblical scholars. I was just reading a biblical scholar on Paul I guess it was about a year ago. A year doesn't seem that long ago in one sense. It was one of the more recent books on Paul and persons, and I forgot the New Testament scholar's name. But anyway, I think she was still making that assumption that dualism is this kind of Gnostic, or it has this strong Gnostic entailment, and I think that's incorrect and wrong. So there's those kinds of dualisms. What I mean by dualism is a more precise term that's often used within analytic philosophy, or analytic philosophy of mind, that says that philosophy of mind deals with the kinds of questions of consciousness and how the mind and body relate and these sorts of things. And dualism, at least to some degree, since modern philosophy is come into sort of the discussion, it's been motivated by kind of René Descartes and Cartesian philosophy. And so what it means is that that substantially there are two different types of things, and those two different types of things make up you and me and what we are. And these two different types of things, in other words, have different characteristics. They have different features to them. They have different properties. They have different attributes to them. And so, but they're not the same thing. And they're not, strictly speaking, they're not identical. They are distinct things altogether, and they are not identical, and they cannot be reduced one to the other. So dualism means that I have a soul and a body, or a mind and a body in more contemporary language, but certainly a soul in theological language, a soul and a body. And it's just the idea that there are different types of features that are descriptive of those two different types of things. So the body commonly is associated with some sort of spatial relation, some sort of spatial extension in the universe. It has extension. It occupies a certain space. I occupy a certain space that your body does not occupy, obviously. Right. But the mind itself is, at least intuitively, distinct from the body insofar as my mind has ideas and has arguably experiences. I have experiences. My mind has certain intentions, you might say. My mind is the kind of thing that thinks. It's the kind of thing that rationalizes. So it has these sorts of properties or attributes, characteristics, and it has certain powers that are distinct from the body itself. The body is not the thing that's thinking. The body is not the thing that's rationalizing. Or encountering a syllogism and working through some sort of argument. The body just isn't that type of thing. The soul, though, or the mind is that type of thing. And that seems to be the intuitive sort of view. And it's the intuitive view that takes us all the way back to arguably, at least in in the history of philosophy, this has been motivated heavily by René Descartes and the Cartesian tradition that follows from that. And so in more recent analytic philosophy, when we use the term oftentimes dualism, we're referring specifically to a constitutional question of what makes us who we are as human beings. Or if we're talking about animals, what it is that makes animals, and then all the way down to plant life, what is it that makes up plant life? And so this, at one level, is a question of metaphysics, but it's a localized question that focuses specifically on individual types of things, particularly biological organisms, if we are biological organisms, or biological organisms as well as just things in general, and what it is that makes us the kind of thing that we are. And as human beings, we are the kinds of things that have souls and bodies, or minds and bodies.